Coming up next on Beyond the Clef, I'm here with retired director from Klein High School, Randy Vaughn, and we're going to be talking about how he utilizes his instrument to work with children every day when he goes out. That's all coming up next on Beyond the Clef.
Beyond the Clef is presented by Director's Choice.
That's right. So we're here with Randy Vaughn, retired from Klein High School. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Hey, you bet. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So we met a while ago now, at the very start of my career, when I was at Kingwood Park High School with John Nielsen. And
I remember that.
Yeah, you came over and worked with us. It was always so fantastic to come in and have you come and work with us. I was always in awe when you came in.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it was fun. I remember those days back at Kingwood High School, new school.
Yeah.
And
Kingwood Park High School.
Yeah, Kingwood Park.
Yeah, it's always confusing for everybody.
Yeah. And I did work with Kingwood High School too. But yeah, Kingwood Park. So, and I remember you as a young director, and you're very eager and very smart, and
then you don't remember me. You're confusing me with somebody else, I think.
Not true. Yeah, I enjoyed it. And those Kingwood Park kids were great kids too.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I enjoyed doing that.
Well, when you came in, something that I'd love to talk to you about. When you came in, there was a way that you were with the kids, and that you were always so positive, and then also you would just bust out that flute and play all the time. It was something that I see a lot of people do that, of course, but
sure.
I think that's one of the most remarkable things that you do is you take out the flute and you start playing, and you would play anything on that page. Horn parts, trumpet parts, flute parts, and we were, I think, working on back then La Gaza Ladra. So it's a pretty choppy piece, but you would just go through. Tell me about your kind of philosophy with playing as a clinician.
Well, I do not go do a clinic without my flute. I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have it.
Right.
Because
is it with you right now?
Actually, it is.
It's like in a holster. You can pull it out at any time.
But I use that, and it started back in college. Dr. Gary Garner was my mentor and my band director and flute teacher at West Texas State University, and he taught us and me to transpose all the different instruments. So I owe it to him, my ability to do that. And when you do clinics, I found that it is so much more efficient, and the students seem to pick up information way quicker when I pick up my flute and tell them how I want it played, and just play it. And we were talking earlier, I was in Lubbock at Friendship High School several years ago doing a clinic, and I'll never forget this. I was working with the second band, and they had played something slow and lyrical, and so I just got out my flute and played the melody section how I wanted it to be played. And I'll never forget this. I finished the phrasing, and I looked at the students, and it seemed like everyone in the band was like this. They were just looking at me, and I thought, okay, I related to them what I wanted, and then we played it again, and it was beautiful. So rather than say, okay, try to do this smoother and talk them through it by demonstrating with my flute, I felt like that we saved a lot of time, and they got to hear me play. And anyway, it was, I do like to use my flute a lot. But thank you for saying that. I do still have trouble with the French horn transpositions. But
well, there's still time.
Yeah. I still got to
go practice.
I will.
It really gets across so much more about the articulation and the phrasing and everything than just trying to tell them, explain it to them.
Exactly.
Right. And okay, so I actually come from an instrument. I play the bassoon, and so sometimes that getting it out and it's 19, 20 different parts, and you're getting all the things together, and it's not really a mobile thing, and you can get a strap. So it's hard for me, and I actually remember you doing that, so now I try to learn trumpet better.
Oh,
okay?
Good.
And so
good.
I've been working on my sound. Mutual friend of ours, Alan Hannon, I was playing in front of the kids once, and after the class, he goes, "You shouldn't do that. You don't have a good sound yet." And so I've been practicing.
That's great.
Let me ask you some advice. How can I get better at transposing and working with kids in the way that you do on insert instrument, any instrument, for our younger audience? You said you learned about transposing from Gary Garner. What is kind of the start, and where do you think people could start practicing that?
Well, what you want to do is just, decide what instrument you want to play, and then just start doing it. You just, make sure that you're doing the right conversion on the transposition, and just do it slow, and just practice. It's funny. I have a brother who taught band in Monahans, Texas, for Dan Gibbs back a long time ago, and a long time ago. And Monahans had 2 honor bands, and Ronnie, my brother, was his junior high director. So this guy could teach. He has since went into another business, Johnson's Enterprises, but we went hiking here a few weeks ago up in Colorado, and he was a sax player, but he's now practicing flute. So but he's not, doesn't have anything to do with music, but he still enjoys playing, and he's been working on flute. So I took my flute up there, and we played duets together, and it was so much fun. We hadn't played together in probably 25 years. So here we were playing duets. But yeah, so, another thing, you maybe see if you could work on learning the flute. It's just so light and easy to use. So I know talking about the bassoon, that's right. Got to be tough because of the
well, and it has such an interesting dexterity that it can imitate a lot of the sounds that you're going to need to require,
right? Exactly.
In order to teach. So
yeah.
There also is something that with your sound that's just so present in the room. Flute is not flute played well can fill up an entire room, and that's something else that you do so well.
Yeah, well, thank you.
How can somebody get better at their flute sound? Let's say, let's transition this to the teacher out there that wants their flute players to be better. What's maybe the best advice you have for them?
I have a lot of directors that I work with that are now working on different instruments, and the main thing is just don't be afraid to get it out and start practicing. And you can get help, get somebody to give you a lesson here and there. There's always people willing to help. That's what's so great about Texas. Man, this state is just, no one is selfish with their information. We're competitive, but yet everybody wants to help. If you just ask for help, these Texas band directors are willing to help you out,
Right. Okay, well, what about students? How can I make my flute students better?
Well,
that's a pretty broad topic, but
yeah,
what are your overall flute concepts that you really hone on? Maybe top 3.
The main thing is, I think not many now. The teaching is such a high level, but I think sometimes in our quest to get to the whole instrument and to get fingers moving, which is important, I think some of us go too soon off of the head joint, the mouthpiece. I think you need to stay every day for weeks and weeks, and even in several months, starting each day just by working with the head joint and making sure that you make a really good sound. And you have to be very detailed with watching what they're doing. Basically, what I try to do is give them less information at first and just tell them general things, and then see how they do, and then if there's a problem, get more specific information. But yeah, the main thing is sticking with the embouchure and the head joint. That would be number 1.
Yeah, and I think a couple years ago, my assistant and I tried an experiment with our articulation, just in general for all our instruments, and you were just saying, give them a little less information and then find out the problem. So instead of going through and figuring out or trying to explain how to articulate to so many kids, what we did is just we said, okay, very general, very vague. Okay, this is what I want you to do with your tongue. And then we went down the row, and out of the 10 kids, let's say, 2 weren't doing it like we wanted it to. So we pulled those 2 kids out separately and had them work on it.
Terrific.
The rest of the kids, we didn't say anything, and they already know how to do it.
That's smart. Yeah, that's great.
It was it was an interesting and scary experiment because you're like, oh no, are we going to screw it up?
Yeah, I just feel like as directors, we want to get in there and make it perfect, and our standards are high, but sometimes you can almost get in the way of the kids if you just, give them less information, if they're using good posture, a nice big full breath without tension. Let the air in, let it back out, and explain the embouchure you want. Start with that.
Yeah. So as we're sitting here at TBA 2019, SMSE 2019, I see your audience member here, your wife.
Cindy, my lovely wife, she's an excellent pianist and former oboe player and clarinet player. And
right.
It always helps to be married to a musician if you're a band director, right?
Yes. Exactly. Well, let me just ask you just kind of a general question, and just to peak a conversation here. When you're working with a group, what is your overall concept of sound that you're trying to get after?
Wow. Boy, that's a great question and a tough one to answer. I have in my head what I think a good overall band sound is, and the different instruments, how I think they should sound. And anyway, I know kind of what I want, and I was that way with my own band at Klein. And I never forget Eddie Green, who's one of the giants in Texas education. He said, just remember, make it your sound that you want, and your band is not going to sound like somebody else across the street or another part of Houston or Dallas. Now, that's kind of broad, but as long as it's a clear, resonant, pure tone, and they play in tune, I know there's good and bad sounds. So yes, we have to have good sounds, and I think most of that comes from just good air support and correct embouchures. If you have the correct embouchure and the correct speed of the air with a natural face, and I think a lot of us, and I used to do this in rehearsals, is try to move too fast, and I was tense, and that tension would go to my students. And so I've learned to try to stay relaxed as I rehearse, and remind the students to use good posture. And I know sometimes when you've got a 4-year all-stater sitting there and they're slouching a little bit, they don't like to be told to sit up. But that's really important that they have good posture and a nice deep breath and a natural, without tension face. Then they should be able to produce a pretty good sound, And you want to play. Well, I learned this yesterday in the Capel Clinic. They said, play the volume of the instrument. And I've never heard that before, and I like that. In other words, if it's a trombone, I hear a lot of trombone players playing with teeth too close together, and it's a pretty big instrument, so it takes a lot of air. So that's like play the size of the instrument. And for junior high, that's a big instrument. It's hard to get that concept because they keep their teeth together, and the sound is pretty small. But that's just an example.
Right.
Yeah.
You referred to already Eddie Green and Gary Garner, two mentors of yours in various forms. We, of course, have heard these names,
Sure.
But some of the younger directors just hear that they're great and don't always necessarily know why. Can you tell us a little bit about those two men and what they've done in the industry, and give us a little bit of a history on them from your perspective?
That's a great question, too. Well, Gary Garner, I went to West Texas because my first year at West Texas, it was then called State University, now it's called West Texas A&M, was my first year was Gary Garner's first year, and he had been the marching band director at USC. He came in, and I heard him play flute, and I knew that's where I wanted to go, and it was one of the smartest decisions I've ever made, because he was, the thing about Gary Garner, he was insistent on everything being correct. Rhythms, articulation. He had high standards in all the basic conceptual things that we do as band directors. And anyway, West Texas was good then, but he transformed it into one of the finer college ensembles in the country, I feel like. And then I owe so much to him. And anyway, it's just high standards. And then when I went to Houston after I left Hereford High School, went to Houston, that's when I started to work with Eddie Green a little bit. And I was a little bit nervous because I I just, I just was just nervous. But he came in and he was so great with the kids, so friendly, and he allowed me to still be me and do what I do. But he had a new way, a different way of saying things that made my band sound better. I was amazed. We'd be playing, and he'd come in and he would just make a short sentence about do this and this and this, and the band, the sound and the way they played it would transform just in one sentence. He was amazing in that way. And I can remember also we were doing a GN festival, and we had a full brass and percussion rehearsal after school. And Eddie won't mind me saying this, Mr. Green. They started playing a GN, and it's really high and loud and fast. And he went, "Stop, stop!" And I went, and he said, "Why would you let yourself sound that way?" So anyway, and I just went, "Oh my gosh!" And the kids looked, and we thought about it, and we went back and played it again, and it was 100 times better. Just that little statement. So it made the kids go, and I hadn't even heard it myself because we had been rehearsing. But GN Festival was loud and fast and high, and we were just overplaying. And so his thing was like, calm down and just play inside your best sound, and that made a big difference in that. So, yeah, those are some things about those two gentlemen that I was very, very fortunate to have those guys as mentors. And something else I want to say, I'm kind of wordy here, is I had great people with me at Klein High School, especially later on, Todd Clearwater and Pat Patterson, Merlin Patterson. Todd Clearwater is now at Klein Oak High School, and Pat Patterson has since retired, brilliant brass technician and pedagogical genius in my word. I learned so much from them, and having them on staff. I think one of the scariest moments in my career, I had been really pretty successful I don't mean that in a bragging way. We'd done pretty well. But then Pat Patterson and Eddie Green were working on some new conceptual things about warm-ups and brass warm-ups, and they started to utilize those, and I remember being very scared because it was something totally out of my comfort zone. And I think we can get too comfortable in our jobs, and I had been comfortable and I hadn't been challenged, and that right at that moment I realized, man, I've got to keep learning. And so I learned so much, mainly brass pedagogy, from Merlin Patterson and Eddie Green, and especially warm-ups. I used to not do big deal in warm-ups, but I started to realize how important the fundamental things we do every day to warm these students up, to get them to sound better and play in tune and do good intervals and do good articulation and breath control and crescendos and decrescendos. You've got to do it in fundamentals. If you don't, you can't expect it to work in your music. So that was a scary time for me, but looking back on it, I grew as a director and a teacher a whole bunch. So it took me about a year to get comfortable again with some of the new concepts, but I'll never forget that. So
I really feel like you're a master diagnostician when you come in and work with programs. And you have to work with so many programs.
Right.
And you have to do it so quickly because you might only have an hour and a half or 45 minutes with
45 minutes, yeah.
Ever.
Right.
So what are some of the quick tips and some of the things that you use to really quickly go in there, some helpful things that we might be able to use in our programs?
Okay, well, that's a great question. So I'm thinking through, first, number one, you want to sound good, but Texas bands now, most of them do sound good because the teaching is just beyond belief good, high standard. It's so much better than it was years ago. Every year these directors get better. I'm trying to think of the number one thing that I think I address with my groups, and I have some incredible groups that I get to work with. But I would say generally, maybe more so in the junior high level, is the I would say balance. That what I'm hearing is brass players playing at a more mature and more resonant and more energized level than the woodwinds. Now, not always, but I'm just thinking in general. And what happens is when the woodwinds have the melody, which is quite a bit, then we're not hearing melody. So we do a lot with balancing textures and colors. And to me, being a flute player, the woodwind color is so important. And I feel like that maybe sometimes some directors, maybe if they're brass players and they're uncomfortable commenting on woodwinds, ignore the woodwinds a little bit. But anyway, I think woodwinds need to be heard. And now they can't compete with brass. Like if you do a concert F, you always tell the woodwinds, don't try to play louder than the brass. You can't do that. And some of them do. So I'm not talking about that. So I think it's important that you let the woodwinds play an F or whatever your warm-up note or whatever you're doing. Woodwinds need to play separately than brass sometimes so they can hear, like you play bassoon. See, I like the woodwinds to match volume in each section, but listen down to the color of the bassoon. I think the bassoon is like one of the most beautiful color instruments with the oboe on top and the bassoon in the bottom. And the woodwinds will balance and listen to the bassoons. It'll transform your band sound. And then in pieces when you're playing, just be careful when the low brass have these white notes, the half note, whole note, that they're not overplaying. I'll hear great brass sounds and I'll look down and it'll say piano. And here's the flute and clarinet or oboe up here with the melody, and you can't hear it because they can't compete with that. So that would be my number one thing that I guess I hear in doing clinics.
Well, Randy, thank you so much, and it's been so nice reconnecting
Hey, you bet. I
with you
enjoyed
again.
it.
And thank you for being on the program, and we'll have to get you on again soon.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Beyond the Clef. For more great content, subscribe on our website at beyondtheclef.com, and be sure to follow us on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, and Facebook.